Imagine a future king, the only legitimate male heir to the throne, lost beneath the waves in a single, catastrophic night. What happens when the clear line of succession, the very foundation of a kingdom, snaps? For England, the sinking of the White Ship in 1120 wasn't just a tragedy, it was the trigger for nearly 2 decades of brutal civil war, where father fought son, and the country was plunged into a nightmare called the Anarchy. This is the story of how one night of drunken revelry cost thousands of lives and fractured an entire civilization. The fatal crossing, the sinking of the White Ship, 1120. To understand the Anarchy, we must first understand the chilling silence that fell on the English Channel one cold November night in 1120. The man who held England in the palm of his hand was King Henry I, the youngest son of William the Conqueror, a ruthless, brilliant administrator. Henry had crushed rebellions, secured Normandy, and brought a fragile, harsh peace to his realm. But for all his power, his world revolved around one person, his only legitimate son, William Adelin. This prince was the future, the indispensable link ensuring the Norman dynasty would continue its iron grip on England. In late November, the royal party was preparing to cross from Normandy back to England. King Henry I, ever cautious, chose his vessel and sailed ahead. But for the young, spirited Prince William, caution was for old men. He chose the Plunged, the White Shipper, magnificent, state-of-the-art vessel, reportedly the fastest afloat, captained by a man named Thomas Fitzstephen, whose family had famously piloted William the Conqueror across the Channel decades earlier. This was more than just a crossing. It was a party. Aboard were hundreds of young nobles, half-siblings of the prince, and the elite of the Anglo-Norman court, the very individuals who were meant to run the kingdom for the next generation. They drank, they celebrated, they pressed the crew to catch up to the king's ships. By the time they cast off from Barfla, the moon was low, and the revelry was reckless. The captain, urged on by the drunken passengers, decided to take a risky, nighttime shortcut across the Bay of Seine. Think of the arrogance, the sheer confidence born of privilege, that they believed even the sea would bend to their will. It was a fatal miss. Sometime near midnight, the White Ship struck a partially submerged rock, likely the Quillebeuf reef just outside the harbor. The impact ripped a massive gash in the hull. The ship immediately began to take on water, the celebratory shouts turning into screams of terror and confusion. Chaos reigned. The ship was sinking fast. Prince William Adelin was successfully put into a small lifeboat and rowed away to safety. But then, in a fateful act of compassion, or perhaps desperation, he heard the cries of his half-sister Matilda, Countess of Preche. He ordered the lifeboat to turn back. That decision cost him everything. As the small boat neared the wreckage, dozens of terrified, drowning nobles threw themselves toward it, swamping the lifeboat in seconds. Prince William Adelin, the future King of England, was pulled under the freezing water, never to be seen again. Only one person survived the wreck, a humble butcher from Rouen, clinging to the mast until dawn. When he was finally rescued, he brought back a tale of unthinkable horror. When the king's treasurer broke the news to Henry I, the king, the famously unflappable ruler, reportedly collapsed and never smiled again. A single shipwreck, a single, reckless night. And with it, the entire future of England, the very principle of stability, had vanished beneath the waves. The stage was now set for a catastrophe, far greater than any sinking ship. The crisis of succession, the successor crisis, the king without an heir. The death of William Adelin was a dynastic earthquake. It was more than just the loss of a son. It was the sudden, violent removal of the linchpin holding King Henry I's entire kingdom together. Henry was a man of immense control, yet here was a problem he could not conquer with an army, a law, or a treaty. He had no male heir. In an age defined by the rigid laws of primogeniture, where only a male line was considered legitimate and truly stable, this void was terrifying. Every successful king in the Norman tradition had secured his reign by ensuring the continuation of a male dynasty. Henry I, for all his efforts, was now a dead end. He desperately tried to remedy the situation. He was 52 years old, still robust, and chose to remarry, hoping for a new son. He wed Adeliza of Louvain, a young, beautiful woman, and for years they waited. But the cradle remained empty. The ticking clock of the king's mortality echoed throughout the castles and courts of England and Normandy, and everyone knew what it meant. A power vacuum was inevitable. So, who was left? Henry's hopes rested on his remaining legitimate child, his daughter, Matilda. Matilda was no shrinking violet. She was not raised to be a queen regnant, but she was raised to be powerful. She was the widow of the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry V, and had, in her own right, been empress of a vast, if fragmented, domain. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and carried the prestige of the most powerful title in Europe. But she was a woman. The barons of England and Normandy, steeped in feudal tradition, believed a woman could not lead them into battle, could not hold the complex loyalties of their own wives and children, and most importantly, could not secure the succession. To them, accepting a queen was a risk, an anomaly, and a terrifying precedent. Was their loyalty to the king's blood, or to the ancient rules of male-only command? This was the agonizing question that dominated the next phase of the crisis. Henry I, however, had made up his mind. If he could not have a son, his daughter must rule. He knew that for his hard-won peace to survive, he needed the absolute, undeniable, sworn consent of his barons. He was about to demand an oath of allegiance that would, for a brief time, seem to solve everything, but ultimately would be worth less than the parchment it was written on. The stage was now set for the ultimate betrayal. The oath of fealty and the rise of Empress Matilda, faced with a skeptical traditionalist baronage King Henry. I undertook one of the most remarkable political maneuvers of the medieval age. He forced his lords to swear allegiance to his daughter Empress Matilda as the future Queen of England and Duchess of Normandy. In 1127, Henry summoned the Great Council of the realm. Every powerful magnate, every bishop, every man who mattered, was made to approach the altar and raise his hand to swear a sacred, binding oath. They pledged that, upon Henry's death, they would uphold Matilda's right to rule as their lady and sovereign. Think about the tension in that hall. These men, fiercely protective of their own status and power, were being asked to shatter centuries of custom. Yet, Henry I was a terrifyingly powerful king. They swore the oath because they had to, not because they truly believed in it. Among the first to swear was David, King of Scotland, Matilda's uncle, and then Henry's two chief nephews, Stephen of Blois and his elder brother, Theobald. The order of their swearing would become tragically significant. Henry didn't stop there. He knew the stability of the realm depended on producing an heir. So, he orchestrated a strategically brilliant, yet deeply unpopular marriage for Matilda to Geoffrey Plantagenet, the Count of Anjou. Why was this marriage so controversial? The Angevins, the people of Anjou, were the historical, bitter enemies of the Normans. The two sides had fought for generations over control of French lands. Marrying Matilda to Geoffrey was politically necessary, as it gave her a powerful, land-holding husband. But it was culturally despised. The Anglo-Norman barons resented the thought of an Angevin influence on their throne. Despite the resentment, the marriage worked on one crucial front. In 1133, Matilda gave birth to a son, the future Henry II. The succession was finally secured, and the barons' biggest fear, a childless queen, was averted. For the next few years, Henry I ruled contentedly, assured that the path was clear. The oaths had been sworn, the son was born. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. When King Henry I died suddenly, in 1135, from a probable case of food poisoning, perhaps from a legendary indulgence in Lampreys, Matilda was in Anjou with her husband. Several days' journey from the royal treasury and the major centers of power in England, the barons, who had resented the Empress and her Angevin husband for years, saw their chance. The sacred oaths, sworn on the most holy relics, were suddenly forgotten, swept aside by the brutal expediency of political ambition. The vacuum was open, and one man, present at the initial oath-taking, was about to make a dash for the crown, plunging the kingdom into an abyss. The counterclaim, Stephen of Blois seizes the crown the moment King Henry I's death was confirmed. The elaborate structure of succession he had so carefully built crumbled instantly. The oaths sworn to Matilda were exposed as hollow promises, and the race for the throne began. The rightful successor, Empress Matilda, was hundreds of miles away in Anjou. The barons were scattered, debating, and hesitant. But in this moment of political paralysis, one man seized the initiative with breathtaking speed and audacity: Stephen of Blois. Stephen was the son of Henry I's sister Adela and Count Stephen of Blois. He was one of the king's favorite nephews, a man known for his charm, his generous nature, and his reputation for being a good fellow. Unlike the austere, commanding Empress Matilda, Stephen was well liked by the English people and the barons. Crucially, He was also close to the Channel when Henry died. He wasted no time. Stephen immediately crossed to England, riding hard to London. The city, which had a powerful political voice even then, welcomed him with open arms. They saw him as a strong male leader, a known quantity, and an infinitely preferable choice to the foreign-linked Empress Matilda and her Angevin husband. Within weeks, Stephen was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, breaking the solemn oath he had personally sworn to his cousin Matilda. How did he justify this blatant act of perjury? His supporters produced an alleged loophole. They claimed that Henry I, on his deathbed, had reluctantly released the barons from their oath, having supposedly regretted nominating his daughter. They also argued that since Matilda was married to an Angevin natural enemy, she was unfit to rule. The church, swayed by Stephen's promise of greater liberties and the political stability he represented, backed his claim, effectively validating the coup. But a crown taken by speed and popular appeal is not the same as a crown held by legitimacy. For the first few years, Stephen was energetic and effective, distributing royal lands and treasures to secure loyalty. However, he quickly proved to be a politically clumsy king. He managed to alienate key power brokers men like the powerful Bishop Roger of Salisbury. His generous grants of land weakened the royal purse. This misstep was exactly the opportunity Matilda needed. Her forces landed in England in 1139, 4 years after Stephen's coronation, establishing a foothold in the west. The kingdom was now officially fractured. The crisis of succession had escalated into open, bloody warfare, setting the stage for what chroniclers would later call the utter breakdown of society. The war was no longer about who would rule. It was about whether anyone could rule. The anarchy had begun. The spiral into chaos, warlords, castles, and the destruction of peace with Empress Matilda established in the west, and King Stephen struggling to control the east and center. England dissolved into a landscape of petty rivalries and localized warfare. This decade of conflict, which lasted from roughly 1139 to 1153, is known starkly as the Anarchy. It wasn't a centralized war fought with grand armies. It was a fragmented, brutal struggle for survival and territory. The two claimants, Stephen and Matilda, served primarily as figureheads for ambitious local warlords and barons who realized the ultimate truth. The central power was broken. What happens when the king's law vanishes? Power flows to the men with the biggest castles and the sharpest swords. This era saw an explosive proliferation of unauthorized, adulterine castles, hundreds of small, hastily built fortresses erected by barons to defend their territory, wage private wars, and, most cruelly, to extort the surrounding populace. The contemporary chronicler, the author of the Jester Stephanie, left us a harrowing description of this time, speaking of a land where Christ and his saints were asleep. Think about the sheer, localized terror, extortion, and torture. The barons, no longer fearing royal justice, used their castles as bases for brigandage. They seized goods, cattle, and crops. If peasants or burghers resisted, they were subjected to horrifying tortures to reveal hidden wealth. Chroniclers describe victims being hung by their thumbs, having weights tied to their heads, or being thrown into stinking dungeons full of snakes. Economic collapse. Farmland was abandoned as people fled to forests or tried to seek shelter in towns. Trade routes were unsafe, bridges fell into disrepair, and the coinage was debased. The entire social fabric that Henry I had painstakingly woven began to unravel. The revolving throne, the military fortunes of Stephen and Matilda constantly shifted. Stephen was captured in 1141 at the Battle of Lincoln, an event that seemed to secure the throne for Matilda. She entered London, but her arrogance and unwillingness to grant the city liberties led to her being chased out in a violent riot. Later that same year, her half-brother and chief military commander, Robert of Gloucester, was captured. The two claimants were forced into a swap, Stephen for Robert. The war simply reset, continuing the misery. The failure of either side to gain a decisive advantage ensured the struggle dragged on, transforming England from a centralized kingdom into a patchwork of self-governing, violent fiefdoms. The anarchy was not merely a political struggle. It was a profound failure of governance, where the common person paid the ultimate price for the ambitions of the elite. This unsustainable chaos could not last forever, and the next decade would bring a series of events that finally, tragically, forced a resolution. The turning point, The death of a prince and the Treaty of Winchester, the Civil War, had raged for over a decade, creating a generation that knew only insecurity and violence. By the early 1150s, both Stephen and Matilda were exhausted, and more importantly, their key supporters were desperate for peace. The sheer cost of maintaining armies and castles against perpetual opposition was bankrupting the kingdom and draining the loyalty of the nobles. But the real shift in momentum came not from a battle, but from the arrival of a new, formidable figure, Henry Plantagenet, Matilda's son. By 1153, young Henry was no longer just the boy whose birth had secured the succession. He was a 20-year-old, battle-hardened, dynamic leader. Thanks to his father, Geoffrey of Anjou, Henry had already inherited Anjou, Maine, and Touraine. He had also married Eleanor of Aquitaine, the recently divorced Queen of France, giving him vast territories in southwest France. When he landed in England in 1153, he arrived not as a desperate claimant, but as the master of a sprawling, powerful domain, the seeds of what would become the Angevin Empire. Henry's military campaign was vigorous, but the real turning point was a tragic and unexpected event on Stephen's side. Stephen had a legitimate son, Eustace, who was meant to inherit the throne and continue the fight. Eustace was a capable but ruthless leader, known for his harsh treatment of church lands. In the summer of 1153, while foraging in church territory near Bury St. Edmunds, Eustace suddenly fell ill and died. This death was the final blow to Stephen's resistance. It was viewed by many as divine judgment for the chaos of the war and for Eustace's cruelty. Suddenly, Stephen had no clear, legitimate male successor to carry on his cause. He had lost his reason to fight and his hope of establishing a secure dynasty. With both sides utterly weary and Stephen emotionally broken, the path was finally clear for negotiation. In December 1153, the leaders met at Winchester to forge a peace treaty. The Treaty of Winchester, or the Treaty of Wallingford, was the official end of the Anarchy. The terms were brutally practical. Stephen would remain king for the remainder of his life, ensuring he kept his dignity and the continuity of the current regime. However, upon his death, the throne would pass unequivocally to Henry Plantagenet. Furthermore, Henry was formally adopted as Stephen's heir. This agreement ensured an immediate end to the conflict and a clear, undisputed line of succession for the future. Just 10 months later, in October 1154, King Stephen died. The nightmare was over. A single shipwreck 3 decades earlier had led to a civil war, but the unexpected death of a prince and a negotiated peace finally brought the violent curtain down on the anarchy, ushering in a new era and a new dynasty. The legacy of anarchy, how a shipwreck remade England. The ascent of Henry II in 1154, the son of Empress Matilda and Geoffrey. Plantagenet marks the end of the Norman dynasty and the beginning of the powerful Plantagenet dynasty, a family that would define England for the next 3 centuries. But what did Henry inherit, and how did the trauma of the anarchy shape his reign and the future of the English state? The first answer is chaos. Henry inherited a kingdom riddled with problems, a debased coinage, lawless barons in illegal castles, and a population that had forgotten what centralized royal justice felt like. His immediate task was not to conquer new lands, but to restore order. Henry II's response to the legacy of the anarchy was not merely to put down rebellions, but to fundamentally reinvent the administration of justice and power. He realized that a strong state could not rely on the fluctuating loyalties of its feudal lords. So, he systematically dismantled the tools of chaos. The castles. Henry II immediately launched a massive program to destroy or seize the illegal, adulterine castles built by the warlords during the war. By forcing these military bases back under central control, he stripped the barons of their local, private power to wage war. The law. Henry didn't just enforce old laws. He created a new, centralized system. He developed the use of royal judges who traveled the country, the itinerant justices, to apply a common law derived from the king's authority, replacing the patchwork local customs and baronial whims that had defined the anarchy. This was the birth of the English common law system that still influences justice globally today. Taxation and finance. The debased coinage was reformed, and Henry relied less on feudal military service and more on a centralized, monetized system of taxation, building a more reliable royal treasury. The paradox of the anarchy is this: the period of utmost state weakness became the catalyst for the single greatest increase in centralized royal power in medieval England. It taught everyone a brutal lesson that the loss of a strong king meant universal suffering. Henry II seized on this realization, consciously creating a government so strong, so legally robust, that the nation would never again tolerate the instability of a fractured succession. From the sinking of a single, drunken ship in 1120, through 2 decades of Christ and his saints were asleep, England was purged of its feudal complacency. The chaos of the Anarchy did not destroy England, it hardened it, forcing it to forge the legal and administrative structures that would underpin the powerful, unified kingdom of the Plantagenets. The very stability Henry I sought and lost with his son's death was finally achieved by his grandson, but only through the crucible of civil war. Conclusion: the story of the Anarchy is a powerful reminder of how fragile civilization is, and how quickly the smallest lapse, a king without an heir, a ship hitting a rock can snowball into a national catastrophe. This was not just a war between 2 cousins, but a foundational event that shaped the very DNA of English law and governance. We often think of history as a series of grand battles, but here, the most important legacy is the administrative resilience born from desperation. What is the most startling aspect of this period for you? Is it the sheer ruthlessness of the barons, the political failure of Stephen, or the incredible escape and eventual triumph of Empress Matilda's line? Let me know in the comments below. If you were a baron in 1135, would you have kept your oath to Matilda, or followed the crowd to Stephen? If you found this deep dive into medieval history and the birth of the Plantagenet Empire insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more cinematic historical breakdowns. Your support helps us continue to tell the stories behind the major turning points in history.